Good morning. In the near future, in May of the year 2025, University of Haifa's Board of Governors will gather probably here. The university will then be 62 years old, not too young, but still alive and kicking. How will the meeting of the Board of Governors look then? Aside from one thing that is certain, that we will all be here, there are many questions hovering over the future of this academic institution that we all value and love. How many students will study here? Moreover, it would be interesting to know where will the students come from? How will this auditorium look? What learning facilities will be used in the classrooms? What will be the areas of research? What innovative applications will spread from here to the rest of the world? My name is Gilad Adin, and I'm honored to open this special session of the University of Haifa's Board of Governors at the initiative of the chairman of the board, Professor Fred Tauber, in order to carry on a profound discussion about these very questions about the future of the university in 2025. We really have a fascinating day ahead of us in which we will analyze opinions, ideas, and forecasts on three main topics. At each table, co-chairmen from the university's Board of Governors and the academic staff will lead together. What awaits us this morning? The chairman of the Board of Governors will soon open the discussion, and then we will hear the university's president's lecture on higher education in Israel. Then we will split into three parallel discussion groups: the geopolitical and social role of the University of Haifa, national, regional, and international perspectives, headed by Ambassador Peter Rosenblatt, Professor David Faraji, Rector, and Professor Hanan Alexander. New pedagogies and learning environment for 21st century higher education, headed by Sonia Landstein and Professor Lily Orland Barak, and research initiatives headed by Professor Rainer Zilbereisen and Professor Perla Werner. The chairman of the executive committee, Admiral Ami Ayalon, the university's president Amos Shapira, and the rector, Professor David Faraji, all share this important challenge. And of course, they will have a central role in the discussions today. During the last few months in preparation for this important event, we have worked hard on creating an interesting mix of people from different disciplines. Members of the board from Israel and abroad, deans, heads of departments, directors of various programs and lecturers, students, of course, members of the university's friends associations in Israel and abroad, and also representatives of the Haifa University's administrative staff. The idea of carrying out roundtable discussions was raised in order to have an open discussion of the university's future by all the people to whom the university is important. This day will also have results. Every discussion will be recorded and videotaped. And during the night, we will edit films that will summarize for all of us the discussions, and which will be shown tomorrow as part of the conclusion discussions. By the way, when we all meet here in May of 2025, we will watch the films again to see how close we were on predicting the future. Now I'm honored to welcome the person behind this initiative, the Board of Governors Chairman, Professor Alfred Tauber. In spite of the fact that you all know him, I think it is important to mention just the unusual combination in his CV. He's a doctor, science philosopher, and a philanthropist. Professor Alfred Tauber retired from Boston University in 2010 as Professor Emeritus of Medicine, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy, and Director Emeritus of the Center for Philosophy and History of Science. Aside from over 125 research publications in immunology, he has published extensively on 19th and 20th century biomedicine, contemporary science studies, and ethics. With his sister, Ingrid Tauber, Professor Tauber directs the Tauber Family Foundation, which funds diverse programs in Israel and the United States for the care and rehabilitation for the mentally ill. The Israeli Health Ministry has recognized and co-sponsored active partnerships with the Tauber Foundation in educational and research programs at the University of Haifa. Professor Tauber and his wife, the historian Paula Fredrickson, made Aliyah in 2011, and of their blended family of 7 children, 3 live here in Israel, 3 in the United States, and 1 in Uruguay. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Tauber.
The truth is, the heart of the matter will be in the panel discussions, and we have a fantastic panelists, relying on the faculty of the University of Haifa primarily. All of us will be stimulated by their discussion and the dialogue, and this is the critical word, dialogue, that will occur between the panelists and the groups. And I urge you to rotate through the panels. It's very difficult to, how should I put it, orchestrate the various components, but think of it as a fluid, dynamic opportunity to hear different people talking about different things. And please, and this is crucial, present your own points of view, and I can assure you everyone will be polite and receptive. Okay, so without further ado, let me just explain. I'm going to give an overview of what I've described as challenges and opportunities in the shifting global economy of higher education. Mark Yudof, the former president of the University of California University System, unfortunately is ill, and Amos and I basically are replacing him. Amos is going to give a more specific orientation about the University of Haifa challenges over the next decade, within the Israeli context per se. So view my presentation as a larger international orientation, and Amos will be more specific. Then we'll break into the various panels. Okay? All right. So the global challenge can be divided into 4 different categories. There are obviously student shifting demographics. By that I mean the student population, and we're speaking internationally, is growing older. The average age, as Professor Trachtenberg said yesterday, of students here in Israel beginning university is 24. Now that's higher than in most countries, but it is part of the global trend. There is shifting financial commitments from the government, in the United States in particular, but also in Europe and here in Israel. Relatively speaking, governments are cutting back in terms of their educational support, and where they are in fact increasing is primarily in what I would call productive payback scenarios. That is scientific research, technology transfer, and that kind of thing. The costs of higher education are growing across the globe. Laboratories cost more money, salaries and fixed costs within universities are growing, pension costs are growing, everything is growing, and the economic situation, whether you're looking at Britain, the United States, Israel, what have you, it's all the same. We're facing a inflation in education which is beyond the inflation of the national economies. And then the most important, perhaps, and the most specific concern is altered manpower needs in the post-industrial global culture. We are now moving to what is called a knowledge-based economy as opposed to a labor-based economy. You look at construction and you see more and more machines. I watched the road being widened going into Jerusalem, and we see these monster cranes, monster bulldozers, and very few people actually working. It's a wonderful metaphor of what is going on. So for us, defining our challenge, the University of Haifa's challenge, has to be understood in particular within this much larger context. And to some extent we have control over our future, and in many, many respects we do not. And perhaps the best way to navigate, if one is a sailor, and I used to be, is to tack the winds most profitably. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So there are certain trends which are organizing the way universities are responding to the challenges. The first is we have to be more efficient. And there's something called competence-based learning. Competence-based learning is closely linked to online learning. Students learn at their own pace. And this, of course, can be looked at in two ways. One can look at it for students who are slower and who need more time and more help. And, of course, students who are more talented and can move more quickly. And, in fact, some students are able to reduce their first degree from 3 or 4 years to 2 years. And universities are instituting programs to recognize that fixed temporal requirements are a thing of the past. And as I already mentioned, part of this competence or efficient concern is that students, because they're older, because they have family commitments, because they're in the workforce, they also need to use their time more efficiently. And prior learning assessment is one way that universities are responding to this. Students are getting credit for on-job training, for military experience, for volunteer experience, and even for hobbies. As a traditional academic, I find this very disturbing, but there it is. And we probably are going to be facing the opportunity of using placement tests and assessments of student performance in ways which are completely novel and which are going to change the requirements for higher education. Now, the demands of relevance is another parameter, as it were, of how we are to understand the challenges. And the notion here is that we have to have targeted educational opportunities for workforce requirements. We no longer expect our students to study Greek and Latin. We expect them to be educated, and more importantly, they expect to be educated in fashions which will allow them to move forward into the workforce efficiently and with competence. And so there is both the traditional educational opportunities which will have to face this challenge, but vocational and technical education is growing at a very rapid rate. But on the upper end, as it were, in the university, and more specifically for us, it turns out that graduate degrees are more and more important. For instance, in the United Kingdom, 9% of job vacancies in the public sector, investment banking, engineering, are requiring graduate degrees. Now, there's a statistic here that I think it was in the rector's report, which is extremely interesting for the University of Haifa. We have about 18,000 students, a little more. About 51% of our students are in graduate programs. 49% are in the first degree. We are already responding to this change. The other, there's so many factors. We're living in a sea of variables here. But one of them, of course, is the commercialization of research, which is another way of saying relevance. In biomedicine in particular, and again, as a traditional basic scientist, my skin crawls when I see this. There's a major transition into what's called translational research. In order to get research grants now, you have to have a very clear understanding as to what relevance one's research is. How are we going to turn your findings in the laboratory into something relevant? Drug development, agricultural development, military, industrial advancement, and what have you. And the notion of just plain basic research, just the notion of having a quest for knowledge or the mystery of nature is insufficient. And I'm going to address that at the end of my talk as to why I think that that's problematic. But I will leave you in suspense until we get there. And of course, the continued development of technology is critical here, and everyone understands that we are in a major, major revolution in terms of the technological imperative, and no one knows what in fact will be in 2025. Just think what we were doing 10 years ago in terms of internet services. It's amazing. It has enormous implications also in the way we think. Way back in the 20th century, we did things like linear, logical, critical thinking of a particular kind. We learned, indeed, in fact, that there was a logic to the process. I don't think that game is present any longer. So this, what I'm calling the technological imperative, is on a slide which you're not expected to look at. It's supposed to overwhelm you. It's divided into various categories: consumer technologies like mobile apps and electronic publishing, digital strategies like games and gamification, etc. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about all of this. But the notion of internet technologies is so pervasive that educational strategies must respond to these opportunities, particularly in terms of what we already discussed, in terms of efficiency and relevance and effectiveness. These technologies are tools, and there is a very interesting question which is beginning to emerge. How many of you remember Marshall McLuhan? Yeah, all the old people. In the 60s, in the 60s, Marshall McLuhan published a book, The Media is the Message. And as a prophet of media, he made it very clear, I think, for those of us who actually were listening, that the media is becoming the message itself. And what we're seeing is the technology is very likely becoming the message. And how we fill that message, of course, is the substance of the issue. But I, being a dinosaur, am concerned about the technology. Learning technologies in particular, we don't know what is effectively taught by technology as opposed to a teacher. We are in the infancy of the technological application to education, and it's going to take a while to sort that out. I think that the analogy with genetic therapies is a wonderful example. In the early 1990s, everyone was excited about the Human Genome Project. We're going to map our genes. We're going to identify all the genes. We're going to sequence all the genes. We're going to have the Rosetta Stone for understanding all diseases. And I wrote some papers with some buddies about, oh, that seems very unlikely. I mean, we just didn't believe that was going to be the case. How could it be? And we gave all the reasons why it couldn't be. And of course, it couldn't be. And I'm concerned in a similar way that we are relying and depending on a technology to solve problems which I'm skeptical we will solve by simply using the media. In any case, I've made my ideological point. But I'm going to, in fact, address the technology. It's the elephant in the room, and we have to deal with it. So we are on the cusp. We're sort of like Moshe looking at the promised land of the educational technologies. There are various categories I simply want to alert you to. There's something called the flipped classroom, where classroom time, and I'm really skeptical about this, okay? Classroom time is devoted to active project-based learning with others. Information is gathered before or after class. In other words, students are expected to be at home, study the materials at home, do their homework, i.e., and come to class prepared to do a particular project that they're responsible for, and they're going to do it in a cooperative setting. I've been teaching here in Israel for over 10 years, and my students don't read anything. And you know, we have conflicting agendas here, right? We, you know, as they tell me, well, we're not professional students, and that's true. And I've been beaten. You know, I don't even try anymore. I write a syllabus, I cut it in half, and then I cut it in half again. And I just, as I said, have changed my expectations radically. I actually taught in Haifa. Once. Don't get me started. What we see is a real cultural divide between the humanities on the one hand and the sciences on the other. And I'm not going to comment on the social sciences. In the sciences, we subsidize our students. We allow them to be professional students. We allow them to, in fact, spend 100% of their time on their studies. We don't afford that opportunity to our students in the humanities and very rarely in the social sciences. This is a critical choice, and it's undermining the very structure and substance of the university. Again, I will elucidate that at the end of my talk. In terms of learning analytics, the management of big data, it's analogous to commercial tracking of consumers to deliver personalized learning. In other words, every time you buy something on the net, everybody knows what you bought and where you live, and eventually they have a profile of who you are, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there are those visionaries who think that in fact we can do that for learning. How does one learn? How does one in fact manage one's knowledge base? Games. It's not just for training pilots. It turns out that games are very effective in training and motivational tools for language acquisition, medical decision making and such. And this is actually a very intriguing application of the new technologies. And just for those of you who are, we don't do engineering here, but I wish we did, there's this incredible technology called 3D printing. You compose something on the computer, and it then sends messages to some apparatus which makes a machine. And you make whatever it is. You're making a building, you make a machine, you design whatever. And this is quite exciting in the engineering format. Now, for those of you who are so inclined, there is on the net a report called the NMC Horizon Report. It's from the New Media Consortia. It's an extraordinary report. It's about 56 pages, so it's easily digestible. It was written by a panel of international experts, and I strongly urge anyone who's truly interested to look at it. And this report summarizes the obvious. There's a growing ubiquity of social media. There's a dialogue between students and faculty, researchers, creation of learning communities, discussion forums, and such. In other words, we could do this if we chose to over time by simply setting up a Facebook page or what have you. Not that I know what I'm talking about, but, and we could continue the discussion in a blog format. Integration of online, hybrid, collaborative learning. That's course content becomes more dynamic, flexible, accessible to a large number of students. Web conferencing allows small groups to solve problems together in workshops. Notice this continued underlying theme of cooperation, group learning, groupthink, et cetera, et cetera. As a dinosaur, I just don't know what they're talking about. I have this very 19th century individualistic approach to learning, and so I maintain a critical view, which is good. Someone has to. There are various mid-range trends, which they are predicting will take over 3 to 5 years. The rise of data-driven learning and assessment, use of new sources of data for personalizing the learning experience. Actually, this is very interesting. There's something called stratified education, where students are stratified both by their innate intelligence, IQ it's called, in the old days, their learning experience and such, and a profile is presented, and then the curricula are presented to them, which is personalized, so that it builds on their strengths and attempts to strengthen their weaknesses. It's sort of like personalized medicine. We'll have this, this notion as to how we're going to respond to drugs, and our dosage, the particular medications, will be contoured, as it were, to our personal needs. So this is all part of educational effectiveness, which again, using a business model, and it is a business model, what we're looking at is the commercialization of education. I mean, let's not play games here. That's exactly what's happening. As my wife calls it, the HMOification of education. To assess student performance and measurement, all for good purpose, all for good ends, but it is a model. It is a particular way of thinking about education. And so they, the Horizon guys, see a shift of students as consumers to creators. Students increasingly demand hands-on learning and experience, media creation and design, research and inventions. Maybe that's true. Maybe. long-range trends, and we're looking at 5 years or more, calling for, quote, agile approaches to change, startup models. Just listen to the language. I mean, the language is just recursive to this new world of startups. This is Startup Nation, right? So the use of models of technology as a catalyst for promoting a culture of innovation to nurture entrepreneurship among students and faculty. It's no longer about knowledge. It is all directed towards a goal, which is exonerated as an entrepreneurial, innovative, creative, imaginative possibility, opportunity. And that's not bad, but the point is that we're looking at a very deep shift in the organizational understanding of what education is about. And of course, everyone is talking about online learning, the benefits, flexibility, and the ease of access, integration of multimedia technologies, and the efficiencies of economies of scale. Amos loves to talk about the economies of scale, and he's right, because we are, in fact, dealing with real budgets and with real dollars, or shekels, or euros. So the major challenges, according to the Horizon Report, problems like mine, low digital fluency among faculty, right? We're the guys who are slowing down everything, right? We're the ones who are unable to adopt to the new technologies. My wife and I often say that we're glad we're retired, that we no longer have to worry about enticing our students to the web pages, et cetera, we just couldn't be bothered. So we are the problem. But problems, as Thomas Kuhn pointed out in terms of scientific revolutions, is you don't change the old guard, you just let them fade away, and eventually will be gone. But more deeply, there's relatively low rewards for teaching in general. And the question that Horizon Fellows are asking is, should we have mandatory training in media, in online learning, et cetera? And of course, there's this so-called competition from the MOOCs, rather, massive open online courses. A lot of hype about MOOCs. It turns out that the relevance of MOOCs is highly problematic. The number of people who actually complete the course, and we're not talking about degree programs, we're just talking about online courses where you have 150,000 students. What's the number? Somewhere 2 to 7%, somewhere in that range? Trivial. And then, of course, the scaling of teaching innovations, institutional inertia. Enormous costs to move this along. Am I running out of time? Okay, it's all right. I slept well last night, remember? So if you want to think about this, and again, this is a slide to overwhelm you, one looks at this in different formats in terms of the content and curricula going around the circle, assessments, learning practices, teaching practices, the organization, leadership and values, connectedness, infrastructure. And the point of the slide is there are many, many components to these kinds of innovations that have to take place, and the institution has to coordinate them in a very serious way. The future is here. There's no denying it. That's why we're sitting here, and we're going to engage in this discussion. And just to summarize, and I'm almost done, the highlights of a shifting educational landscape include student demographic changes. They're older, they're dropping full-time employment, competence-based learning, targeted educational opportunities, budget cuts with rising tuitions, increasing institutional disparity. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Investment in capital projects becomes increasingly difficult. Growth of graduate jobs is a very important part of how the institutions must adjust. Commercialization of research is a critical new component. And finally, this continued development of technology. Almost done. Continuing the summary, we're moving from this labor-oriented economies toward knowledge-based economies, and those who don't have the knowledge, don't have the languages, are going to be left behind. There's a digital divide, just as important. The relation between earning potential and education is driving the expansion of the middle class internationally. And so there are very powerful cultural, social, geopolitical forces which make demands on the universities to expand their ability to educate the middle class. And the middle class is growing. In China in particular, we're seeing astronomical numbers, and there's no surprise why the Chinese are investing billions of whatever currency they have to expand their universities, while foreign universities are being attracted to China to help them. And we have to understand, as I promised I would mention, this business model for higher education and what it means. Am I done? No, I'm not done. Wait a minute. I've got my good slides at the end.
It's okay, you're taking Amos's time.
No, I'm not. Let's go back. Here?
It's now the second one.
How did you know that? Yeah, right. All right. So what's happening here, and Amos may say something about this, new kinds of partnerships have to be developed, both between business and university, but also with other institutions. And I'm going to ask you to think about what is the cost of this entire shift? What is the consequences for the transmission of the canon, the tradition, as it were, that began in the Renaissance, continued through the Enlightenment, and into our own era? How, indeed, are we going to inculcate the values that built the university in the first place? How are we going to be sure or be assured that the notions of objectivity, seeking of truth, rationality, etc., and the open dialogue between all of us is maintained in this environment? These are not values which have been easily attained historically if one studies the evolution of the core values of the university. And I'm talking about the values which guide scholarship, which guide the exchange of ideas, which guide the critical evaluation of them. These have been fought for over hundreds of years. We cannot assume that they will persist. We cannot assume that they will be firmly entrenched unless they are continually promoted. And critical thinking of a kind that I think still has value is of a different cognitive nature than the kinds of thinking which is demanded by certain kinds of high technology notions. And so the university has grand opportunities, but it also is in jeopardy. With the business orientation of large universities coupled to the pragmatic economic necessity of providing trained workers, the focus of the university is in danger of shifting from knowledge generator to something else. And the question is, what is the something else? And a great divide looms. The world of higher education is already divided into two groups: a small cadre of elite institutions which will pursue their traditional commitments to excellence in research, and a large multidimensional network of training centers which transmit the knowledge produced by the elites. Those elites control their knowledge and, as always, utilize the opportunities derived from their creativity for further institutional growth. Their hegemony is supported because the elites provide the competitive edge for achievement in industry, health, agriculture, and military innovation to their supporting societies. The claims for Israeli investment in sustaining and creating elite universities is the geopolitical strategic demands, the economic innovation and industrial growth, employment leading to social order, continued participation in the grand project we call Western civilization, and democratic citizenship. Each of these are compelling by themselves, collectively, overwhelmingly so. So where will the University of Haifa itself be in 2025? We strive to be the strategic and economic anchor of the North, a bastion of educational and social opportunity, a model for Israeli democracy, A research institution for innovation? Here I put a question mark. The future is ours, and all we need is a vision, strong leadership, cooperation, support, that's all. We can all dance the hora together, right? There they are, happy Israelis dancing. But to become an elite university requires something more. It requires political will, robust fundraising, venture capital, partnerships with industry and established research institutions, and jazz. And jazz is the creative improvisation, imagination, energy, and risk-taking. And frankly, I don't know if we're dancing or if we're watching. And so we have to ask ourselves, and you should ask yourself during the day, in these geopolitical challenges, social identity and responsibilities, educational objectives, research directives, what indeed do we want to be? And I know I spoke a little longer than I should have, but that's okay, because we have a lot of time. We have our panels until 2 o'clock this afternoon. Amos, you should take your time and orient us in particular. And I'm not going to take any questions. There will be plenty of questions and discussion later on. Thank you very much.